SEP Fanfic Readings presents Finding Hermione by ebookdragon. Chapter 45. The Press Conference from Hell. The atrium was still crowded with people. Their appearance brought with it a flurry of flashing lights from the cameras. The noise of all the witches and wizards rose to a deafening level. Draco took in the crowd still gathered. He spotted the remaining members of the Wizengamot mingled amongst the crowd. Neville looked uncomfortable as he spoke to Lavender and Mrs. Edvard. Draco couldn't figure out if it was the crowds, Lavender, or Mrs. Edvard that was affecting Neville. Mr. Parkinson had a group of eager journalists gathered around him. He gesticulated wildly at some dramatic point in his story and knocked a feathered quill flying. The journalist, without blinking, pulled another from his pocket and set it to work in replace of its fallen comrade. Not far away, Mr. Flint appeared to be giving the press a mournful statement about their loss. Occasionally, Mr. Parkinson or Mr. Flint would pause from their interviews to look over and glare at one another. Never comfortable around large crowds, Greg appeared to have left the ministry. Hannah and Flora were also gone. Hermione led the group over to the front of the fountain of the magical brethren. Draco, Harry, Daphne, Tracy, and Blaise moved off to the side so that Hermione and Theo could share the spotlight. It was their victory, after all. They did the work to create this spell. Hermione tried gesturing for them to rejoin her and Theo, but Draco shook his head only slightly. Journalists and photographers gathered around in front of Hermione and Theo. Cameras flashed, and the reporters started shouting questions all at once. The cacophony was going to give Draco a headache if he had to endure much more of it. "Victory!" Hermione shouted, pumping both fists in the air. The word echoed across the chamber with the help of a sonorous charm. "We have achieved victory today." A thunderous cheer rose from the crowd. The noise reverberated off the vaulted ceiling. "What now?" a journalist asked once the cheering died down. Hermione gave the journalist a sardonic smile. "Now the real work begins. We have to find people for the jobs needed to get the new Department of Marriages and Family Law off the ground." Hermione dug in her purse and pulled out an immense sheaf of papers out of the bottomless bag she carried. She levitated the stack of papers, had them divided themselves up into smaller piles, and started floating them around the room. After Hermione dispersed the papers, she addressed the crowd. "We want to thank you for coming out today to show your support. I, for one, am glad to see our society take this step. Too long have we remained behind the times. Too long have we remained stagnant. It is time to march forward into a more modern age." Applause resounded throughout the room. Hermione stepped to the side to give Theo her place at the podium. Theo waited for the applause to return to polite interest before he addressed the crowd. "You hold in your hands a pamphlet detailing information on the Granger Bill. One of the items you will find is a list of positions we need filling, along with a description of duties. We urge you to fill out an application with Human Resources within the next few days. We only have a small amount of time to set up this department, and we need to hit the ground running. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to hand the floor back to Hermione." Polite clapping followed Theo's statement. The floating pamphlets diminished rapidly as witches and wizards snatched them from the stacks. Duplication spells were performed throughout the room. Murmurs passed through the crowd along with the rustling of papers as people perused the list of positions available. Hermione took center stage once again. "Thank you, Theo," she said. "I'm not sure if many of you know this, but once a bill is passed, it is effective immediately. Now, to stem the potential rush of divorce filings, we are asking that only those with a severe need apply for a divorce at this time." "What constitutes a severe need?" an eager witch in front row asked, her quill poised in the air ready to take down Hermione's answer. Hermione took a deep breath in and let it out in a slow exhale. "Abuse," she stated. Hermione held up her hands for silence as more reporters rushed to interpret the question. "I know we don't want to think about such atrocities going on within our community, but I fear we've ignored the issue for far too long." Another deep breath in and out. Her hand trembled slightly before she clenched it into a fist. "Victims of domestic violence may apply for and be granted an immediate divorce from their spouses without the spouse's presence being necessary for the proceedings." Hermione held a blank piece of stiff paper above her head and showed it to the crowd. Draco was confused and wondered what he was supposed to be seeing. It seemed that many in the crowd shared Draco's confusion. "To many of you, this looks like an ordinary piece of blank paper," Hermione said. "For those who are seeking safe shelter, they would see an image on this paper and know they can ask for help where this image is displayed. Many businesses in Diagon Alley, Cokeworth, Godric's Hollow, Hogsmeade, and other wizarding communities around Great Britain have agreed to display these signs on their store windows. Many medical facilities have also agreed to display these signs as well.
What are the signs for? Someone chirped up from the middle of the crowd.
These places will offer safe shelter to anyone that asks for it. They will then contact the ladies in charge of running our new domestic violence shelter and will be taken to a safe house for their protection.
What is this domestic shelter called?
Granger House, Hermione answered proudly.
And where's Granger House located? Another reporter asked.
We have many locations, but for the safety of the occupants, that information will not be revealed, Hermione answered.
Who's in charge of running this shelter? You said ladies. Are you not running this?
This is more than a one-person job. I expect it will also be psychologically difficult for all those involved. It is difficult to see the signs of abuse on a woman or her children day in and day out, to see the fear and the pain, to deal with the psychological trauma that has been inflicted on those victims. I have asked 2 ladies to be the main points of contact at the shelter whom I feel have the mental fortitude to handle these problems daily, as well as provide safety and protection for those seeking shelter. Allow me to introduce you to the manager and assistant manager of Granger House, Mrs. Methuselah Edvard and Miss Lavender Brown.
Mrs. Edvard and Lavender made their way to the front of the crowd to stand beside Hermione. Draco watched Lavender taking deep breaths as she turned to face the crowd. She stood slightly behind Mrs. Edvard with her chin tilted up as if she were looking over the crowd rather than at them. She appeared equal parts timid and defiant. After a startled pause, "Why would you hire your husband's mistress?" was the first question to come out of a sneering reporter's mouth. Hermione looked over at Lavender. Her gaze traveled to Draco, and he gave her an encouraging smile that he didn't feel.
Lavender and I have made our peace with one another, and there are no ill feelings between us, Hermione answered.
So you're fine with the affair she had with your husband for the majority of your marriage, and 4 children she had with your husband. You're willing to forgive and forget? The same reporter asked in disbelief. Similar murmurings of incredulity greeted the reporter's statement. Draco could understand. He would not be so forgiving were he placed in a similar situation. But then Ronald Weasley had never been such a good catch. He was never worthy of Hermione Granger.
Today isn't the day to discuss my marriage to Ronald Weasley, or his relationship with Lavender Brown, Hermione started. She held up her hands for silence when the reporter looked to interrupt again. Let's get back to the matter at hand. These ladies in Granger House will provide protection and a safe home for victims of domestic violence.
Did you know about Ronald Weasley's affair with Lavender Brown before the day on the platform? Did you make up the story of your obliviation and to appear innocent of all knowledge of your husband's affair? Is your relationship with Draco Malfoy an elaborate scheme to get revenge on your husband? The reporter's rapid-fired questions at Hermione, not bothering to give her a chance to respond. Hermione shot a glance at Draco for help. Harry tensed as the questions became more accusatory. Theo stepped forward. That's all the time we have for today, he said, calling the press conference to a close.
One more question, a young blonde witch spoke up with a quill poised. Are you now divorced from Ronald Weasley? You claim to have been abused by him, which allows you to have an immediate divorce. Have you divorced your husband?
Hermione started to turn away from the crowd when Theo called the press conference to a close. Draco caught the look of exasperation she quickly stifled before she turned back to the reporters.
As I've said before, Hermione answered patiently, my relationship with Ronald Weasley isn't the focus of today. The focus of today's event should remain on the passing of the Granger Bill and the founding of our first domestic violence shelter. I thank you all for coming out today and showing your support. I would like to thank all the businesses and medical facilities that graciously signed up to be safe harbors for the victims of domestic violence.
Hermione turned away from the crowd that was blocking their way to the fireplaces. Draco and the rest of the group walked along with her back to the bank of elevators. Hermione, Draco, Blaise, Tracy, Theo, Daphne, and Harry crammed together into one elevator. As the doors were about to close, they heard a commotion coming from the fountain. "What's going on?" Draco asked. He was crammed at the back of the elevator with Hermione. He craned his neck, but he couldn't see over Theo's head. "Shit!" Harry spat closer to the front. "It looks like they've started in on Lavender since they couldn't get answers from Hermione. Go on without me." Harry stepped out of the elevator to go to Lavender's rescue. The doors closed behind him.
"Oh, it's all my fault," Hermione said quietly. "I shouldn't have put the spotlight on her."
"Well, Lavender is a person of notoriety right now," Tracy pointed out. "She's going to have to learn how to live with the image that she's given people of herself."
"I can't believe that you would deign to be in the same room as her, let alone hire her to help rerun her domestic violence shelter," Daphne said in disbelief.
Hermione sighed. I know it must be hard for you to believe, but I forgave her. They exited the elevator into the waiting room of the Wizengamot offices. Hermione paced around the center of the floor. She gnawed on her lip and clenched and unclenched her hands. God, how could I have been so stupid? Hermione berated herself. It's not your fault, Tracy said, trying to placate Hermione. Hermione looked over to where they were standing, clustered in a group watching her. She met Tracy's gaze. It is my fault, though. You aren't responsible for watching out for Lavender Brown, Daphne said a bit impatiently. She spat Lavender Brown's name like it tasted foul. You have completely discredited your shelter by hiring that woman. Daphne, Draco said warningly. Daphne rounded on Draco and glared at him. Don't Daphne me, Draco. Someone needs to say it. It's completely crazy that she would even want to be in the same room with that woman. She saved me from him, Hermione shouted at Daphne. Daphne and Tracy froze. What do you mean, Hermione? Tracy asked. I don't think he was just obliviating away my memories of his affair, Hermione whispered. I think he was doing other things to me. The elevator dinged behind them, and the door slid open to reveal Harry, Neville, and Lavender. Harry and Neville looked angry, but Lavender looked defeated. She didn't look up at anyone as she exited the elevator. Her hair hung down, covering her bowed head, and she slunk in the corner of the room and sat down in a chair. Don't hate her, Hermione beseeched the group. She kept him away from me. She outed him that day on the platform. That doesn't make her a hero, Daphne hissed at Hermione. It doesn't make her a villain either, Hermione retorted. Blaise and Theo looked questioningly at Draco. He shrugged his shoulders. He didn't care much for Lavender Brown. If Hermione wanted to forgive her, then so be it. Draco couldn't hate her because her actions led them to where they were today. Draco pitied her, but he didn't like the difficulty that Lavender Brown brought into their lives. Neville cleared his throat. I need to get back to the school, he said. Neville turned to Harry. You said there's a way out from here. Yeah, Harry said. Come on, I'll show you where. I should go too, Lavender said softly, standing up and skirting around their group to stand near Harry. She looked up for the first time. Her anguished and scarred face looked for and found Hermione in the center of the group. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. I shouldn't have come today. Hermione broke from the group and went over to Lavender. Hermione stopped short of touching her. Everything will be fine, Hermione said unconvincingly. Lavender let out a mirthless laugh. No one will see me as anything other than Ron Weasley's whore, Lavender said bitterly. You're not a whore, and I don't give a shit what the world thinks, and neither should you, Hermione said passionately. That's easier said than done, Lavender said wearily, especially when it's your friends that think you're the fool. Lavender turned away. Draco caught the defensive looks that Daphne and Tracy shot at Lavender's back. Hermione, we don't think you're a fool, Tracy started. We just don't understand, Daphne finished. I know, Hermione said in placating tones. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Listen, it's been a long day. Let's get together another time. Hermione looked tired and defeated. Draco went to her side and slid an arm around her waist. She leaned into him and pressed her face into his side. Draco could hear her inhaling and exhaling deeply. Draco stroked her hair to calm her. Hermione, don't leave mad, Tracy pleaded. Blaise had moved to Tracy's side. He was trying to urge her back to the bank of elevators, away from Hermione and Draco. I'm not mad, Tracy, Hermione said. It's been a tough day, and I'm upset the Granger house didn't get the reception I thought it would. Tracy nodded. Okay, Hermione. Well, we're here to help you in any way we can. Thanks. I appreciate everything you've already done, Hermione said, not meeting anyone's gaze. Hermione and Draco said goodbye to everyone. More Draco saying goodbye, and Hermione standing quietly beside him. They went down the same corridor Harry, Neville, and Lavender had gone down. The corridor was narrow, only fitting 2 people walking side by side, and often overlooked. It was an escape flue for the Wizengamot, a backup should they ever be unable to disapparate from the Ministry. They arrived in the study at Spinner's End. Hermione stumbled out of the fireplace and resumed her pacing. Hermione, Draco said, trying to get her attention. It was starting to worry him how much she was stressing about Lavender Brown. I've messed all this up, and I have to figure out a way to fix it, or no one will ever seek help at Granger House, Hermione said as she continued to pace and gnaw on her lip. Draco stopped her as she tried to pass him by. He put his hands on her shoulders and forced her to stop and look at him. You didn't mess it up, and we will figure out how to smooth this over, Draco told her. I shouldn't have introduced Lavender as one of the people running the shelter, Hermione admitted. Draco didn't disagree, but he couldn't stand the dejected look on her face. He enfolded her into his embrace. "It will be okay. We'll figure something out." "She was there, and I wanted people to start seeing the real Lavender," Hermione murmured into his chest. Draco didn't know how he was going to convince Hermione that Lavender Brown wasn't someone she needed to fix. Lavender needed to fix herself. Maybe she already started and didn't need Hermione's interference. She showed up today without her glamours for the first time in years. "Hey," Draco coaxed, tipping her chin back up. Hermione looked up at him curiously. "I don't know if you know this, but you got divorced today, and I've been looking forward to this occasion for months," Draco teased. He waggled his eyebrows at her suggestively and grinned roguishly at her. Hermione grabbed onto the distraction with both hands and laughed up at Draco. She started running her fingers up and down the silk of his silver tie. "We definitely need to celebrate such a momentous occasion,"